No one knows exactly at what point reality starts to lie, or how long a place can stand while hiding the pieces that contradict it. Yossi pulls down the brim of his archaeologist's cap, crouches in the dust, slips 2 fingers into a crack in the stone, and feels under his nail something that simply should not be there. Yossi Ben Ari, an Israeli archaeologist specializing in epigraphy, is supposed to be checking filler blocks brought in from a renovation site on the Temple Mount. He runs his headlamp over the surface, presses on the stone, searches for the cut lines. Under his palm, he feels a slight drop, a sharp, almost cutting edge. He takes out his field knife, widens the crack by a few millimeters, and a whitish sliver, smoother than the stone, appears. Until now, the Temple Mount, or Haram al-Sharif, has been for him an untouchable plateau, an archaeological black hole that one only brushes from the edges. There, in this block salvaged from a secondary wall, he may be holding the one thing no official excavation has ever dared to promise. He already knows it without daring to put it into words. He finally raises his head. In front of him, behind the depot's fence, the esplanade stands out, hanging above the valleys. A rectangle of stone set over emptiness, framed by enormous walls that modern measurements put at nearly 500 meters from north to south. What he is holding was not found on the plateau itself. It comes from a forgotten corner, a small support structure dismantled during drainage work and removed discreetly. In his plastic box, the other fragments collected over the past few days mingle. Dust from mortar, shards of pottery, tiny tesserae. But this piece catches the light differently. Yossi blows on it, removes the beige powder. Under the film, an almost ivory surface, slightly convex. He thinks of a bone. His brain already files it under probably animal to be checked later. Then he sees the incisions. 1 line, 2, 3. Too regular to be an accident, too fine for a modern chisel. The silence tightens around the table. The Temple Mount, in the texts, is not lacking in details. Hebrew accounts that speak of a sanctuary attributed to Solomon. Flavius Josephus measuring the porticos, describing the courtyards, recounting the destruction by Titus's legions. Greek authors, more distant, who evoke a fabulous temple razed by Rome. Byzantine pilgrims passing by an empty spot. Later, Muslim chroniclers describing the noble sanctuary, the mosque to the south, the dome raised over a rock. But in the soil of the plateau itself, almost nothing. No systematic excavations, no clean trenches outlining strata. Archaeologists circle around the sacred rectangle, dig along the walls, slip test pits into the tunnels to the west or south. They find gigantic Herodian blocks, Greek inscriptions torn from ancient balustrades, fragments of Iron Age pottery in the city of David. The heart, itself, remains closed. Yossi knows all this. It's the first thing you learn when you work on Jerusalem. Here, emptiness is not a lack of data, it is a political decision. So this little piece taken from a secondary wall, wedged in a recent fill, should not change anything, except that the incisions now form a sign. Hypothesis A, the most obvious one, comes to him in 20 seconds. He tells himself it's surely just a fragment of late decoration, reused, planed down, tossed in there during some remodeling. He imagines the Ottoman period, masons dismantling a Mamluk building, recycling everything they can to shore up a wall, stuffing the gaps with debris. The fragment would then be a leftover ornament, a piece without context, torn from a story that can never be reconstructed. Maybe even part of a medieval funerary plaque, moved without care. This idea reassures him. It puts distance between him and the vertigo that rises when you associate Temple Mount, bone, and ancient mark. He knows that around the Haram, the recycling of materials is the norm. Pagan temples supplied Byzantine churches. Crusader columns ended up buried in house walls. Roman blocks are now invisible under later layers. In this chaos of reuse, a marked bone might be nothing more than an anecdotal witness of a nearby cemetery, or of an artisan's workshop. He repeats this to himself, leaning over the metal lab table, the neon lights buzzing above his head, like a mantra to calm his slightly trembling hands. Then he reads the spoil sorting report, sees the precise layer from which the fragment comes, and that whole hypothesis collapses at once. The fill does not come from a late wall, but from a layer nestled right against the very footing of the eastern retaining wall. in contact with masonry typical of the Great Herodian phase. No medieval structures, no known cemetery, no mixed modern strata. The people in charge of the excavation recorded every cubic meter in detail. This piece had been trapped there for centuries, probably since the monumental reconfiguration of the Esplanade, at a time when Rome already held the region. Hypothesis B then takes up all the space. Yossi tells himself that what he has under his fingers could be a remnant of ritual practice connected to the Second Temple. A bone, perhaps animal, marked with signs used for control, sorting, redistribution of sacrifices. The rounded surface could correspond to an identifiable anatomical part. The incisions, if correlated with other fragments, could form a marking system, letters, numbers, symbols indicating a function. In this scenario, the fragment does not speak of a single isolated episode, but of an entire organization. He imagines priests, scribes, assistants handling remains, recording, marking to distinguish what goes back into the fire, what is consumed, what is distributed. The Temple Mount would then become not only a center of prayer, but a gigantic administrative and material apparatus, regulating the flow of animals, grain, offerings. Everything once believed about the boundary between the sacred and logistics would shift. The Esplanade, in this reading, would cease to be only the site of a vanished building and become a management hub, almost a machine. He is seized with enthusiasm, starts drawing diagrams, linking this fragment to accounts of sacrifices, to Josephus's descriptions. He already sees articles, conferences, a new way of telling the story of the temple. Then the result of the first analysis comes in, and this whole system turns against him. The bone is not animal. Time contracts. Hypothesis C suddenly imposes itself. If the fragment is human, if the incisions are intentional, if the context rules out a conventional cemetery, then what he has found speaks neither of decoration nor merely of ritual administration. It may speak of an action on the body, of a marking that does not stop at sacrifice. A human bone, worked, preserved, sealed into masonry as close as possible to the heart of the most sensitive place in the Near East. And now, the reassuring ritual explanation begins to crack. The idea that the Temple Mount is a stage fully known through the texts recedes. Something else appears, more disturbing, harder to articulate within accepted categories. This is where Yossi hits the wall. Not a stone wall, those he knows by heart. He knows where their giant blocks meet, where the joints have been redone. The wall that now rises before him is made of silence, regulations, averted eyes. He tries to obtain permission to go back to the precise area where the spoil was taken. Not to dig the platform, not to open a trench in the Esplanade, just to look again at the slope, check the section, take more fragments from the same mass. The first refusal is polite. The area is sensitive. You can't let just anyone in. The work is already advanced. The spoil moved. He is advised to make do with the bags already collected. He insists. He explains that a single fragment is not enough, that he needs a series, a broader context, comparisons. He talks about DNA analyses, micro-CT scans, the possibility of identifying the age, sex, geographic origin of the individual. With each email, each call, the answer tightens, becomes drier. He is reminded that the plateau is religiously administered by the Waqf, monitored by the police, that no direct excavation is allowed there. No one mentions treaties, resolutions, occupation status, but all of that is there, between the lines, in carefully chosen words. The only real reason for this blockage is not written in the reports. It lies in the impossibility, for each side, of accepting the idea that the very substance of the mount could tell a story that escapes the established narratives. If this is an ancient human bone, integrated into the structure, every possible interpretation becomes explosive. If it is very old, older than the known phases of the temple, some will see in it the trace of a cult that predates the three traditions. If it is contemporary with the Second Temple, the slightest hypothesis of ritual involving human remains can be rejected as blasphemous. If it is later, Crusader or Islamic, then the idea of manipulating remains, of caches, of ritualized reuse will open political abysses. No one wants this fragment to become a flag. Neither the religious authorities, who fear the questioning of their narratives, nor the political leaders, who dread that each new hypothesis might reignite unrest in the streets. The wall, for Yossi, takes shape one morning when he finds himself stuck in a narrow corridor at the entrance of an administrative office. He is holding his plastic box, fingers clenched around the lid. In front of him, a civil servant keeps repeating that the file will be reviewed in due time. Behind the door, he hears low voices, sentences interrupted by sighs. At his back, a line is forming. Bodies are pressing forward. One of them unintentionally pushes on his shoulder. His shoulder blade bangs against the metal doorframe. A sharp pain runs up his neck. He feels as if he himself were trapped in a masonry, wedged between two opposing blocks of will. This pain, that precise point where the bone meets the cold metal, stays with him all day. He still feels it in the evening, while handling the fragment in the laboratory, a raw friction with no room to breathe. He then realizes that he will not be able to count on broader access, nor on a systematic campaign. The wall cannot be bypassed with scientific arguments. It is there to keep the ground from speaking too loudly. The experts he consults outside the official circle react with caution. At first, they admit that the bone seems ancient, that the marks appear intentional, and that it probably fits into a complex practice still poorly understood. Then, very quickly, they qualify their statements. Some think they see in the incisions traces of utilitarian cutting, rather than symbolic coding. Others emphasize the possibility of a later disturbance that would blur any clear reading. But what unites them most is what they hold back from saying. Almost all refuse to explicitly link this fragment to one or another of the religious narratives about the Mount, as if they feared, behind every word, the spark that would set the whole plateau ablaze. A shared unspoken takes shape. So Yossi does what he can with what he has. He sends the fragment for dating and isotopic analyses to a laboratory that does not explicitly carry the name of Jerusalem on its forms. The results come back fragmented, like echoes. The bone seems to belong to an adult individual. The isotopic signatures suggest a diet compatible with that of a local population of the ancient Levant, but the margins of error still cover several centuries. The marks, seen under the microscope, have polished edges, suggesting prolonged contact, perhaps repeated rubbing by a soft material, as if the object had been handled, worn, before being sealed away. The idea he had of a temple mount fully mapped out by texts begins to crack. He had grown up with the image of a place where every era had left its narrative, where the broad outlines were known. A temple attributed to Solomon, destroyed by Babylon, a second sanctuary rebuilt, enlarged by Herod, crushed by Rome, later replaced by Muslim edifices. A site where archaeology, unable to pierce the plateau, had to content itself with confirming things at the margins, adjusting dates, refining plans. This fragment, however, does not fit so easily. It confirms nothing. It does not directly refute the traditions, but it disturbs them. It serves as a reminder that at the very heart of the most commented on, the most monitored, the most claimed site in the region, there still exist gestures, objects, practices that do not fit into official categories. Yossi had believed that one day, with enough patience, the Temple Mount would allow itself to be described as a clear sequence of phases: Canaanite, monarchic, Babylonian, Persian, Hasmonean, Herodian, Roman, Byzantine, Islamic. An orderly stacking of layers, each legible with the right tools. Instead, he discovers a space where the strata do not calmly succeed one another, but intersect, are reused, are buried within one another, sometimes incorporating fragments of bodies. He also loses another, more intimate illusion, that of a profession where data always end up, sooner or later, producing a shared narrative. Here, the figures, the sections, the dates do not lead to a stable synthesis. They shatter against invisible borders, against taboos that appear in no method's manual. It is not the absence of evidence that sets the limit, but the fear of what a piece of evidence might mean for millions of people. In its place, he discovers a narrower, darker field, that of a knowledge that must accept remaining partial, edged by zones of imposed silence, a knowledge that advances by micro-clues, by fragments, all the while knowing that certain questions can never be asked publicly. He keeps working, but with the feeling that the map he is drawing will never be complete, that some gaps will not remain unfilled for lack of traces, but because people will have decided not to look at them. In his notes, he gives up writing evidence, ritual, temple. He contents himself with cautious words, marks, probable context, possible uses. The emotional charge of the place seeps even into his vocabulary. One evening, he gently sets the fragment back in its box, closes the lid, and sits down, his shoulders heavy. Outside, the plateau is silent. He thinks of all the times people have spoken of the status quo, of joint management, of respect for sensitivities. He now sees what these formulas concretely mean for someone like him. The certainty that part of what the ground whispers will have to remain a whisper. He then catches himself asking a question he would never have formulated at the beginning of his career. How many possible truths about this place have already been deliberately buried, not by time, but by fear of what they might trigger if they came to the surface? The box is stored on a low shelf, in a lab that smells of wet stone and disinfectant. Through the small window, one can make out, in the distance, the edge of the esplanade, a row of blocks lit by yellow spotlights. On the table left empty, a fine film of dust has settled, tracing the exact outline where the box once rested. On the plateau, silhouettes move in silence, gliding between the thin trees, their steps muffled by the paving stones. A cat walks along the base of the wall, disappears into a crack. Above, the wind catches the voices of a distant prayer, stretches them, distorts them, until you can no longer distinguish anything but a steady breath. In a corner of the storage room, a poorly closed bag of rubble lets out a trickle of gray earth that forms a small powdery tongue on the ground. No one notices it.